my wildest dreams from law school to this point now as the Attorney General for my home state. Did I imagine that the president, with the stroke of a pen, would try to redefine what it means to be an American in this country?
My constituents enjoy a lot of the provisions that were included in the 2017 bill, but New Yorkers, we got screwed on that $10,000 SALT cap. We got to fix it.
The only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin.
Walmart's raising prices is a canary in the coal mine for the devastation Trump's tariffs will have on Main Street.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, we're going to lean pretty heavily into the law. Here's one question. Does being born in America give you, as someone born here, the right to become, with that birth, a citizen? As you know, President Trump has been pretty vocal recently about his desire to end what is known as birthright citizenship. He marked his intentions very clearly on his first day back in office, the second time around, with an executive order that sought to do just that. Now, today, the Supreme Court began to weigh in, hearing a case that deals with the 14th Amendment, public opinion, and the president's agenda. It also deals with a much larger question that the court may lean more aggressively into. Can a federal district judge, with an order, block the actions of any executive, meaning any president? Also, in the law, one of our big topics tonight, a Wisconsin judge on the other side of it, Hannah Dugan, facing federal obstruction charges, and why she and her attorneys are arguing prosecutors cannot charge her with any crime for helping a man evade federal immigration officials. Also, something that might become law. House Republicans are, in fits and starts, moving forward with President Trump's budget and taxation legislation. But there's a sticking point, a pretty prominent one, with some lawmakers over state and local tax deductions, and that, brace yourself, could pour salt on the plan. More on where negotiations stand as the show continues. And, as you might remember, the president is continuing his trip in the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates, the final leg of that tour, which has been marked by quite a few business deals and a fair amount of controversy. Meanwhile, in Turkey, Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky skipped talks to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. We start tonight with CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. Jan, thank you so much for joining us from the Supreme Court. Set the scene today, what you heard and what it might augur for the future.
You know, Major, it was 2.5 hours of, I think, pretty difficult arguments for the justices, because there's a majority, based on my count, that would like to end these nationwide injunctions. They think they're inappropriate and they go well beyond what district court judges have the power to do. That said, they seem to be completely lacking a consensus on how to do that. What kind of bright line rule would they adopt? How would they write this opinion? So, I mean, while I think they would like to end nationwide injunctions, Major, I'm not at all sure they're going to be able to find that exit strategy for how to do that, because this case is so unique. You know, every judge that's taken a look at the issue of birthright citizenship has said it's unconstitutional. So there's no division in the lower courts. There is a nationwide rule, the opponents of Trump's executive order say, and that's exactly how it should be in a case like this. You can't have piecemeal litigation. You can't have different states with different rules for citizenship. So that was causing a lot of problems, just the nature of this case. Of course, as you know, the merits of birthright citizenship are not at issue now, although I think they probably will be down the road, Major.
And yet, Jan, the court took the case. It seems to want to do something in this space, not necessarily, as you just indicated, with birthright citizenship, but with this idea of the breadth and scope and frequency of nationwide district court injunctions.
Without question, absolutely. And as the Solicitor General said today, there have been 40 of these nationwide injunctions entered just in President Trump's second term since he took office and started handing down all these executive orders, which is well more than we've ever seen historically. But of course, remember, this is not a partisan issue. One of the last briefs that President Biden's Solicitor General filed in the Supreme Court urged the justices to take control of these issues and do away with them, because, you know, President Biden was getting hit with nationwide injunctions from conservative judges in some of these red states, like Texas. The same with President Obama, who also opposed them and saw his DACA, for example, program get hit with some of his immigration efforts. So, you know, presidents don't like nationwide injunctions, and that's regardless of whatever party they're in. The justices, though, they could have dealt with this earlier, and now they've got this case, which is not a great case for them to be deciding the issue on. And honestly, I mean, it's just something. I thought the arguments today were something of a mess. Like, they seem like they're not quite sure how they're going to handle it, and they may not. I mean, sometimes, Major, you know, they think they're going to decide something a certain way, and then they'll start writing the opinion, and then there's an expression, that opinion won't write. And then they'll change their votes or they'll change their minds. So we'll see. I expect a decision certainly by the end of June. So they've got some time, but not much time.
Speaking of those arguments, messy or not, I want to play for our audience Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and get your feeling on the other side about whether this was representative of some of the things the court was grappling with. Let's listen.
The real concern, I think, is that your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive, where everybody has to have a lawyer and file a lawsuit in order for the government to stop violating people's rights.
Jan?
Yeah, and I mean, what she said there, Justice Kagan echoed later, saying that she agreed it does seem like catch me if you can, because, you know, if you're going to file a lawsuit and you've got lawyers and then you get a judge to enter an order, you know, saying that this birthright citizenship doesn't apply to you, that's great for you. But then what about all those other people who don't have lawyers, who don't know what the rules are? They would be subject to potentially Trump's new executive order if you didn't have nationwide injunctions. That's the argument. Some of the justices, though, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think, does not oppose nationwide injunctions in any event. But some of the justices who do, some of the conservatives, suggested that courts could deal with that. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said, listen, the better way to handle this is just treat it as class actions. That's a different rule. The parties, who are all be similarly situated, could be treated as a class, and then judges could enter a temporary restraining order or an injunction protecting them as a class. It would have the same practical consequences, but it would be a different rule. And he said rules matter. How courts go about that, that matters for people's faith and trust in the integrity of the courts, Major.
And Jen, very quickly before I let you go, you're very, very good at analyzing not only what happens in arguments, but where the court might be landing. When we see this ruling, do you expect it to be almost entirely about this question of district court injunctions and almost nothing about birthright citizenship, saying the president can't do this by executive order? That's clear. We're going to rule on that and get to this other larger or seemingly competing issue.
Yes, this came up multiple times today. Of course, the administration didn't ask the court to decide the underlying merits of the issue. It's not briefed. It's not properly before them. So unless they do something else, then this will just be about nationwide injunctions. Major, I will tell you, though, there were a couple times today during the argument where several of the justices suggested we just need to go ahead and deal with this. We've got to deal with the underlying merits. Let's just get on with it and decide it at the same time. Why not? If they do that, they'll have to have additional briefing, maybe additional arguments. So they would have to actually enter an order asking for more filings, because right now that issue is not properly before them, the merits, the underlying merits.
We're going to keep a very close eye on that, and to help us do that will, of course, as always, be Jan Crawford, the best. Thanks so much, Jan.
Thanks, Major.
Washington is one of the states suing the administration over these underlying matters. My conversation with that state's attorney general a little bit later this hour. Scott McFarland joins us now from Milwaukee because something very important is happening there. Federal immigration officials say, and the federal government says, that a judge there interfered with the legitimate legal process to arrest someone in this country illegally. And that sparked nationwide interest. The federal government arresting a judge. What is it all about? Scott McFarland will fill us in. Scott, what happened today?
Major, this looked the way we expected. A case that was larger than just the singular defendant. Hannah Dugan entered her not guilty plea as expected to a charge of obstruction. They put a trial date on the calendar for July 21st and 22nd. But outside the courthouse, where I'm standing now, it was just a sea of protesters, supporters really of the judge, protesting that this case was filed in the first place. You could hear them inside the court as the proceedings were going on. They were so large and loud outside. That really is the fundamental issue here. Is there a separation of powers issue? Is there an overstep by the Trump administration? Not only are the judge's supporters arguing that, the judge herself, in her motion to dismiss this case, argues that judges enjoy judicial immunity from actions they take, official actions they take, as part of their jobs. Really an echo, Major, of the Supreme Court's famous July 2024 presidential immunity decision that presidents enjoy immunity for official acts. We'll see where that motion to dismiss ends up. It could end up delaying this July 21st, 22nd trial here in Milwaukee.
And Scott, remind our audience of what this is about, what official acts the judge took, and what the federal authorities say was criminal or allegedly criminal about those official acts.
In the charging documents from the Department of Justice, they allege the judge about a month ago in her local courtroom a few blocks away rerouted a criminal defendant who was there in her court for a case away from immigration agents who were waiting outside to potentially detain and deport that criminal defendant. The feds allege that not only did the judge know those agents were out there, that she sent some of them to the chief judge's office and then moved the defendant out a different doorway, further away from where the immigration agents would be. She's pleaded not guilty and says this is not a criminal act and that this case should be dismissed. But the prosecutors are emphasizing that this, in their minds, is a corrupt obstruction of justice and fueling the flames more, Major. The FBI director, Kash Patel, on his social media feed a few weeks ago, posted a photo of the judge in handcuffs as part of a perp walk with agents after the arrest. That is not standard practice in the Department of Justice to release those types of images publicly.
Scott McFarland, as always, sir, thank you. Caitlin Huey Burns joins me now from Capitol Hill, where the efforts, machinations, dialogue, huddling continues to try to get the president's legislation dealing with taxes and the budget through. What's the latest state of affairs?
Yeah, Major, there's a reason that you don't see sausage being made on television because it's actually quite boring and incremental. And that's what we've been doing here. It's been about 24 hours since I last spoke to you. And we've had some movements, and I'll walk you through them. But the biggest sticking point at this point so far in this bill has to do with the issue of salt, not the condiment, but the state and local tax deduction. That is really kind of gumming up the works here. Basically, if you extend the Trump tax cuts, there is a limit on how much one can deduct from their state and local taxes. And in high tax states that also happen to have a higher percentage of Republican moderate members representing them, places like New York and California, places that helped make the Republican majority, they're very concerned about that cap on the state and local tax deduction. It's about $10,000 now. They want to raise it to about over $30,000. $30,000 is what's in this new bill. They want a higher deduction. Their argument is that this is what helps to pay for this entire bill. Without us, you don't have the bill and you don't have the pay for, is their argument. So you've got a handful of moderate members from really competitive battleground districts arguing for a higher cap. But like anything else, this legislation is a lot of give and take. So you have that concern from some more moderate members. The more conservative members are saying, okay, hey, if you get that, we want some steeper cuts to some of these programs we've been talking about. A big sticking point for conservatives is the cuts to Medicaid programs and other social safety net programs, particularly around work requirements. This bill strengthened work requirements, but that doesn't phase in for another few years at the end of Trump's term, or Trump will likely be out of office then. So they want to have that come into place sooner. So a lot of different, sticking points here and there. The general public, your eyes probably glaze over hearing all of this. But the bigger point is this is a huge, delicate balancing act, and the speaker can really only afford to lose about 3 votes. The big question I have heading into tomorrow, this is all supposed to go through the Budget Committee. They're not even sure they have the votes to pass this through that committee. So big hurdles remain. The speaker, if I know anything about him in the few months that I've been covering the Congress so far, he is ever the optimist. He's a glass half full kind of guy. He insists they're going to get something passed at least in the House, by next Friday. So we shall stay tuned to all the sausage making with a little bit of salt.
Yes, Caitlin, very well done. Sausage, salt, and gumming things up, all in one live shot.
Can you tell I'm hungry?
Your metaphors work.
Running
They
around
always
here all
do.
day.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Caitlin indicated, Republicans pushed the president's budget bill forward. House Democrats, including Pennsylvania Congressman Brendan Boyle, you see him right there. Well, they have plenty to say about it. Not much of it charitable. I'll chat with him next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. House Democrats, they are slamming the Trump budget package. It's being advanced by 3 Republican-led committees. One of those Democrats joins me now from Capitol Hill, Congressman Brendan Boyle. He is, interestingly, from Pennsylvania's 2nd District, but far more important for the contours of this conversation, he's the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee. I'm going to have a timing question for him in a minute. He's also a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, one of the 3 panels that's moving this legislation forward. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for joining me. A scheduling matter. Your chairman, Jody Arrington, quoted in Punchbowl moments ago, said he wasn't sure the Budget Committee would meet tomorrow to finalize the process of putting all the various component parts of this bill together. What can you tell me about the schedule as you know it?
Well, good to be with you, and I have to say I'm carefully watching my own phone for any sort of text message or call from Chairman Arrington. As of now, it looks like the committee meeting is still on for tomorrow morning. I have told all of my Democratic members, 100% of whom are committed and planning to be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. So for us, that is still the plan until I hear otherwise. But obviously, we do know, based on your good reporting and the reporting of others, that they have a real vote count problem. And they also have a bit of an attendance issue as well. So the combination of those 2 things might mean there'll be a delay in their so-called big, beautiful bill for billionaires.
Speaking of that thing you just mentioned, the billionaires part, I want to read for my audience something you posted. Republicans just voted down an amendment to give their budget that would have given tax relief to 99.999% of Americans, everyone except billionaires. They're fighting to protect a tiny number of billionaires, all while their budget rips health care away from 14 million people. We'll get to the 14 million people in a second. What was that amendment, and why do you think they voted against it?
Yeah, so the background on that is they keep saying falsely that if they don't pass their legislation with trillions of dollars in tax cuts, most of which go to the richest 1% or even 1/1000th of a percent, that if they don't pass that bill, then everyone else will see tax increases. Well, we Democrats in the Ways and Means Committee, during an 18-hour markup, as we call it, we called their bluff. We introduced an amendment and said, you know what? Let's make this bipartisan. In our amendment, we will ensure the tax cuts continue for everyone making under $1 billion in this country. And that is literally, I did the math, 99.999% of the American people. Only a few thousand or so people who are in the United States and are billionaires would see their tax rates rise to what they were before Donald Trump took office originally in 2017. Well, guess what? We had the vote. Every single Democrat voted for this amendment to provide that tax relief, and every single Republican opposed it. So showing that, frankly, when they've been saying they're for tax relief and they're not just focused on billionaires, that vote, Bill Parcells used to say, you are your record. Well, I believe that as a legislator as well. You are your voting record. The reality is Democrats showed we are for tax relief for everyone, but not making sure that billionaires are taken care of.
And Congressman, you said in that social media post, 14 million people losing health care. The preliminary Congressional Budget Office numbers on that are around 8 million, if I've read them correctly. No. How do you get to 14?
Yeah, well, let me show my math. So that comes from 3 different areas. The Medicaid cuts, that's the 8 million that you're thinking about. But then if you add the loss of health care from the loss of ACA premium supports, as well as another aspect of the ACA marketplace, the Congressional Budget Office confirmed this week that totals 13.7 million Americans who would lose their health care coverage if this bill, as it is now, passes.
On that point, let's just talk about Medicaid for a second. The last year that you were in the Pennsylvania legislature, which is what you served in before you came to Congress, that was 2015. We spent as a federal government $549 billion on Medicaid. Last year, we spent $894 billion on Medicaid. Aren't those who say that rate of increase is alarming and must somehow be restrained? Don't they have some kind of structural policy point?
They actually don't, and here's why. There was a big event that has taken place in Pennsylvania between 2014, when I was last in the State House, and now, and that was we had Medicaid expansion. Pennsylvania was one of those states with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature that hadn't expanded Medicaid as part of the Affordable Care Act. However, in the years since I've been out of Harrisburg, they did expand Medicaid. So that way the working poor, those folks who are making pretty low income, were working, but were making just too much to qualify for pre-ACA Medicaid. They now are able to get coverage. And frankly, almost every state at this point, including a lot of red state America, has expanded Medicaid. So that's the big difference and the reason for the increase and why it's really not an apples to apples comparison when we look at the money being spent on Medicaid today versus a decade ago.
I appreciate the perspective. Congressman Brendan Boyle, ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Russia and Ukraine were supposed to hold direct talks in Turkey today. Why President Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, well, they chose not to show up. More on that later, actually next, right here on America Decides.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together.
Welcome back. Because you are a shrewd and observant audience, you probably figured out what President Trump was talking about there. But just in case, it's about Ukraine and ending that war. That was aboard Air Force One. There was some talk of Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, President Trump, maybe high-level delegations from all three countries going to Turkey to sort all this out. That did not happen. Our Wee Jajang is following the president in his travels and reports to us from Abu Dhabi.
President Trump received the royal treatment from the moment he stepped foot into this region, and that certainly was the case here today in UAE as well, where he visited one of the biggest mosques in the world, as well as the presidential palace as part of an official state visit, then wrapping up his day with a lavish state dinner. But of course, this is also a business trip for the United States. In fact, the theme of this entire visit for his first foreign trip abroad has been, let's make a deal. And in this country, we expect the focus will be artificial intelligence. This country wants to be an AI hub for the entire world. And so they will try to hash out a deal, perhaps involving the American company NVIDIA. We are watching closely whether that company will be able to export about 500,000 AI chips here every year. We do know that in March, these two countries already agreed to a framework where the UAE will invest over a decade $1.4 trillion in AI infrastructure as well as energy. Tomorrow, the president will be meeting with business leaders, and he'll also visit a monument that pays tribute to the Abraham Accords, which, of course, he brokered during his first term to normalize relations between several Arab countries and Israel, and UAE is among them. And one other important note, Major, that was happening in the region. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, traveled to Turkey for anticipated talks between Russia and Ukraine, which fell apart. Putin decided not to go. President Zelensky of Ukraine also said he would not attend. And when asked about this, President Trump said that nothing was going to happen anyway in terms of a significant breakthrough until he and Putin met. And of course, that did not happen. So we are closely watching how that conflict could unwind. Major, back to you.
Wee Jajang, thank you. I want to bring in our reporter panel. Meredith McGraw, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Finn Gomez, our executive director of White House and Politics here at CBS News. What a formidable title that is. Meredith, let me ask you about not only what the president said on Air Force One, but this idea that is now, I think, coming upon the Trump White House that Putin is a different kind of cat than they thought, and this is taking a lot longer, and the prospects of working this out, much ballyhoo during the campaign, first day, even when I'm president-elect, is proving much, much more complex.
Much more complex. You know, during the campaign, like you said, we would hear from Trump all the time that he thought that he could find a solution to this within 24 hours. And what we're seeing here is a really protracted and really agonizing process for the Trump administration, for the negotiators who have been trying to come to some sort of middle ground here. But I think the Trump administration, I think President Trump is really at a fork in the road here with these negotiations. He's expressed publicly, privately, that he's frustrated with Vladimir Putin at this moment. And, you know, I think Putin talking about potentially going to Turkey was more of him just trying to avoid sanctions that we know Republicans and Democrats in Congress are.
And even Trump has said he is theoretically open to if this doesn't move along.
If this doesn't move along. And so, like I said, I do think we're reaching kind of a critical moment
and
here.
Finn Gomez, if it is a fork in the road, it feels like a very significant fork in the road.
Absolutely, a really big fork, I think. Look, I spoke to a senior administration official just a little while ago. I was at the White House earlier, and their takeaway from this whole potential Turkey meeting that didn't really materialize into much is that at least they're talking. At least they're getting closer than they were before. And look, I do think that the president overall has had a successful trip to the Middle East. I mean, not only these economic agreements that he's made, yes, some of the numbers might be a little inflated, right, a little balloon, but he's had some success here with Syria. There's serious sanctions, the steps towards normalizing with the relations with that country, to the economic agreements, the AI agreements that Ouija was talking about, and to this. Of course, also at the beginning of the trip, it was the Israeli-American hostage that was freed.
Alexander.
Edon Alexander that was freed. So there has been some wins here for the president during this first major trip of his second term.
So I want to play for you some sound that happened yesterday. And things like this happen, folks. They happen. We can't get to them last night's show. We're going to get to them today. So Mark Pocan is a member of the House, Democrat from Wisconsin. He asked a question to HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's a fascinating exchange. Listen, I want you to comment on the other side.
If you had a child today, would you vaccinate that child for measles?
For measles, probably for measles. You know, what I would say is my opinions about vaccines are irrelevant. I have directed Jay Bhattacharya.
Sure. No, like I said, I don't want to.
So that everybody can make that decision. But I don't want to seem like I'm being evasive.
Yeah.
But I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice from me.
Well, I'm glad he cleared that up.
Yeah, the Secretary of HHS. Saying.
And let's remind ourselves, back to the campaign, Make America Healthy Again. That was the whole idea. I do have these ideas, and you better listen to me. And I'm going to take on all these various factions of the either pharmaceutical industrial complex or the food industrial complex, because I have better ideas, and you ought to listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, RFK Jr., like you said, he has espoused his ideas on vaccines for years now. He's known as one of the leading vaccine skeptics, and for him to say, wait, don't listen to me, I don't have an MD, is kind of something, especially considering he's the HHS secretary and he oversees agencies that should be providing.
And there's a communications component to this.
Yes.
And on the question of measles, setting aside COVID and other vaccines, but measles, the medical evidence there is abundantly clear.
For
it
decades.
Helps. Yes.
Absolutely.
And he's still hesitant there.
I think to a lot of moms and dads at home watching that, I would think it would cause some concern. You know, like if measles has been something that's been demonstrated for years as a public health emergency.
Now, Finn, I know you want to talk about something we did on this show yesterday. Malcolm Kenyatta was on this program. He is part of the DNC vice chairmanship. Been several elected. There's now a controversy over whether or not those two elections with him and David Hogg were valid. And he's now publicly calling out David Hogg over lots of issues. Let's listen.
The problem I have, and I talked about it online, and we'll talk about it in some detail today, is that David has such a casual relationship with the truth. He understands, like I understand, that this complaint about the procedural mechanisms of the election was filed back in February. When I saw David's statement aligning this with this myth that he has been the target of, some Democratic Party smear campaign against him, it really frustrated me.
Finn, your take?
My take is 1A, great job, great exclusive interview by Major Garrett.
Stop that.
Way before
Stop
MSNBC.
That.
No,
Stop
a lot
that.
of news out of that one. 2, honestly, let me just say this. I spoke to some DNC members today and also some just base voters that I check in with from time to time throughout the cycles. And there's a lot of frustration now where they feel that, as Malcolm Kenyatta said yesterday to you, their focus should be on Donald Trump and the Trump administration, not this inter-party fighting. And right now, this is taking away the energy and the focus of where they should be focusing at a time when it seems to be opening up, where their numbers seem to be getting better, when we see 2028 potential contenders out in these early states already. They're focusing on themselves. It's like that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other bro, let's go. And that's what they've told me anyway.
Spider-Man memes, bro, let's go. That's why Finn Gomez is always welcome at the table. Meredith McGraw, Finn Gomez, thank you very much. Washington State is one of those challenging President Trump's efforts to end birthright citizenship. Next, their state's attorney general joins me to assess the arguments we heard today at the Supreme Court. You're watching and very much enjoying all those bro references America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thank you very much for staying with us. We're following today's argument at the Supreme Court over birthright citizenship and whether or not federal district court injunctions go too far. 22 states on the matter of birthright citizenship have challenged the president's directive to do away with that, which of course is enshrined in the 14th Amendment. I'm joined now by Washington State Attorney General Nicholas Brown, who's one of several Democratic state attorneys general challenging the Trump administration's efforts, heard by the Supreme Court today, to significantly rewrite the definition and application of the concept of birthright citizenship. Mr. Attorney General, good to see you. I'll give the audience a brief run through your resume. Harvard Law School, U.S. Judge Advocate General, U.S. Attorney. In your experience in the law, did you ever imagine there'd come a day in this country where we would be revisiting Supreme Court precedent and the 14th Amendment as regards birthright citizenship?
No, absolutely not, and thank you for having me, but never in my wildest dreams, from law school to this point now as the Attorney General from my home state, did I imagine that the president with the stroke of a pen would try to redefine what it means to be an American in this country and would try to strip away the rights and liberties and protection of children in our country who are guaranteed citizenship. But that is exactly what the president did, and is exactly why we had to sue, and that is exactly what the arguments were this morning in front of the Supreme Court.
Based on your witnessing of those arguments, what is your gut sense about where this is heading?
Well, the arguments today were principally focused on whether or not the ruling in Washington state and the ruling in Massachusetts should apply to the states that participated in that litigation, or whether or not it should apply to only individuals who bring cases. So the court really divided most of their attention to the argument about the scope of nationwide injunctions. And you could see the justices really struggle with some of the arguments that the Department of Justice was making on behalf of the president about why, in this particular case, that they should try to narrow the scope of nationwide injunctions. Because really, when you get down to the heart of it, it's kind of absurd. The idea that if you are born in my home state of Washington, that you are an American citizen, but the second that you cross across our border to Idaho, that you would lose your citizenship automatically, or that if you're born in New Jersey and you move across to Philadelphia, that you would no longer be an American. And that's just kind of absurd. And you could see the court, that really justices of all stripes kind of struggle with that issue. But at the heart is really the president's attempt to undermine and erase birthright citizenship. And so that wasn't the principal argument today. But you could see many justices on the bench today really start to press the Department of Justice and the Solicitor General on the constitutionality of what the president did, because 150 years of Supreme Court precedent, statutory action, and all sorts of legal scholarship has all confirmed that what we said in court today has been the law of the land, and I feel very confident that the court will ultimately uphold that ruling.
If you'd be so kind, Mr. Attorney General, since you're the first African-American Attorney General in Washington State history, briefly educate my audience about how this all got started. When the colonies first settled, they inherited Great Britain's application of the law, birthright citizenship. wasn't called it then, was accepted. Many states had it, but did not recognize it for enslaved Americans. Then you had the Dred Scott decision, then the Civil War, 14th Amendment, and Supreme Court testing of it afterwards. Help my audience understand the scope of what birthright citizenship has meant historically in our country.
Well, sure. As I said, really birthright citizenship goes back about 150 years in America. It was not part of our original founding documents, but it was enshrined in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause, which was part of the scope of civil rights amendments that were addressing the rights of newly freed black Americans in this country to make sure that there was no question about their citizenship. But since that time, the Supreme Court, and not one, but up to 4 Supreme Court decisions, has reaffirmed that if you're born in America, you are a citizen. There's a very famous case from the 1800s, the Wong Kim Ark case, that really dealt with this issue, dealing with the children of people whose parents were from China. But there have been subsequent Supreme Court decisions and appellate court decisions all across the country in different jurisdictions that have built upon that precedent. So the arguments that we were making in court today were not new arguments, but instead that the arguments that were being advanced by the President and the Department of Justice, they have now grown from what was a very fringe, kind of absurd legal theory to one that's advocated now by the President of the United States. But again, there's no legal basis for that. It's a very sort of strained argument, and I could see that once the court reaches those issues, that they will reaffirm what we already know.
And what is your biggest fear about where the court could come down on this?
Well, my fear is sort of twofold. One, that if they ruled against Washington or other state partners, that they would empower this president to continue his lawlessness. And frankly, it makes me a little sad that a large part of my job now is to protect American citizens from their president, where we should be focused on all the bread and butter issues that people are most concerned about. But time and time again, we're seeing a president ignore the Constitution, ignore congressional authority and statutory authority, and simply do what he wants and what he thinks is right. And so my fear, in part, is that we would see the court sort of give strength to the president's arguments and to his lack of restraint. So that's one part of it. But more broadly, at the base of this case, it's about children and families. And I am really afraid that if the Supreme Court did what the president is asking them to do, that they would be stripping those guarantees from children in our country, and it would undermine the fabric of our democracy. And that would really cause harms not only to Washington, but to all of our fellow states, where we would have to then provide for the care of those individuals that are no longer going to be protected by the federal government. And so it does real damage to our democracy. It emboldens a president who doesn't really care much about the Constitution. And most importantly, it affects children and their families, or families and their children here in America.
Can I ask, before I let you go, very quickly, a real quick question, Mr. Attorney General. How is it that a president with executive order, any president, could rewrite the Constitution and existing statute? Because as I understand it, there's the 14th Amendment and enabling legislation.
Yeah, there's the Immigration and Nationalization Act, which reaffirms some of these very same principles. But I think, if we've got one consistent principle over the first 4 months of the president's administration, is that he doesn't care much about congressional authority. When he cuts off grant funding to states that has been allocated and approved by Congress, he's undermining their authority as well. And he's doing that again with the birthright citizenship order. But, I've been Attorney General just since January 15th of this year. We filed our 19th case against the president. And frankly, I'd rather that we didn't have to do that. But when the president acts like he's above the law, we cannot abide by that. We have to challenge that because there's real harm being done to individuals in our states across this country. And frankly, if I was in Congress, I would be upset that the president sort of disregards statutory authority and precedent to do what he wants and doesn't abide by our separation of powers and our 3 branches of government. And, I try really hard not to sound like an alarmist. If you talked a little bit about my resume, I started my legal career in uniform, serving my country. But we are in an alarming moment in America where the president time and time again has sort of shredded the Constitution, acted unilaterally, and we can't allow that to happen any longer.
Washington State Attorney General Nicholas Brown. Mr. Attorney General, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Attention Walmart shoppers, get ready to pay more. What the world's largest retailer said today about the potential effect in the aisles of President Trump's tariff policies. That's next right here on America Decides. Welcome back. The world's biggest retailer by volume and profit, that would be Walmart, warned today that it may have to start raising prices later this month due to President Trump's tariff policies. Walmart's CEO made the announcement, and it appears to be a pretty clear signal, at least from this one big retailer, that the president's trade war is about to filter through the American economy. J.D. Durkin is at the New York Stock Exchange, joins me now. J.D., always great to see you. I want to play for you two pieces of sound. One from the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of Walmart. His name is John Rainey. And then someone a little bit more recognizable to our audience, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, not only about prices at Walmart, but supply shocks to come. Let's listen.
Just a week ago, we were at 145% tariffs. Now, we're very appreciative of the progress that the administration has made to get them down to this level, but I would say that it's still too high for consumers. We'd like to see them come down more.
We may be entering a period of more frequent and potentially more persistent supply shocks, a difficult challenge for the economy and for central banks.
JD, give me your perspective.
Well, we'll start with Walmart here, Major, and I think the way you lay it out is really important. There's really no surprise to me why so many analysts make the argument that Walmart is, in their estimation, the most important company in the United States of America. It's really the canary in the coal mine for the pressure points that American shoppers and retail goers are going to face. In this case, for the months and the weeks ahead, it is the largest employer in the U.S. outside of the federal government, touting a workforce of more than 2 million people. 90% of Americans, Major, live within 10 miles of a Walmart. So when Walmart speaks, and they are out there very much taking the lead in this very uncertain terrain that we're in for Wall Street. And you hear the Walmart CFO very clearly communicating that they are now at the pressure point where they expect tariffs to be passed down to the consumers. I think you had a lot of other retailers out there who have been kind of looking over their shoulder, waiting for Walmart to be the first big name to say something like that. In fact, they put a pretty close timeline on it here, Major. They said they're looking to do it this month into next month. I think this clearly communicates and signals that the cost of the new U.S. tariffs are prepared to be passed down to the consumers. And then with regards there to the chairman of the central bank, Mr. Powell, those supply shocks here, he sees an economy that is set to be more volatile with inflation. Remember, we've had this big lingering debate down there in Washington about whether or not the price increases from tariffs would be a one-time sticker shock, or might they be a bit more lingering? Chairman Powell is now pretty clearly leaving the door open to that second possibility, and that spells a continuation, I would argue, of the very uncertain terrain that the president's tariff policies have had now over Main Street as well as Wall Street.
And, JD, this is, for our conversation, really a China-focused conversation, because though the market earlier this week celebrated, or last week, going down from 145% tariffs to 31%, 31% is still very, very high. And as Walmart made clear, suppliers can't absorb that, retailers can't absorb it. It has to be passed along.
There will always be some effort from the Walmarts of the world or any other retailer to try in good faith, I would think, to absorb some of those costs. Some of the export costs will be absorbed. But ultimately, yes, I think you are correct. That will be passed down. And I think that some semblance of a deal with China is really the ultimate white whale of all this. The Trump administration is trying to get Beijing to heel, which is far easier said than it is done. It's one thing to have these other trade announcements that cross the finish line. Yes, Wall Street wants to see progress made on all of those. But really, when it comes down to the stickiness and the political differences, geopolitics at play between Washington and Beijing, it is good we got some answers. It's good we have a so-called meeting mechanism, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent laid out a few days ago. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions there, Major. We know it's a 90-day pause. What is the timeline implementation? What happens after that? Can the numbers be adjusted in the near term of those 90 days? That makes forward-looking guidance from the Walmarts of the world incredibly difficult. And as we know, the stock market is largely driven on optimism for the future, but that future is unclear right now.
J.D. Durkin, thanks for wrapping it up for us. I appreciate it. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report coming up next right here on CBS News 24/7.